Hello everyone, and welcome back to the studio. And in today's short video, I'll be sharing with you realistic detail techniques for creating this massive painting of the Grand Tetons, as well as tips for creating atmospheric perspective within a landscape painting. And as always, before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and hit that bell to get notified every time a new video comes out. I really hope you enjoy. Let's get painting. I begin sketching out the entire landscape using a General's white charcoal pencil, and I think it's absolutely vital that we lay down an accurate sketch before beginning the painting. And all the materials I used for this painting are linked in the description down below. I begin laying down the first of the color using a mixture of ultramarine blue, titanium white, cobalt teal, and a little bit of quinacridone magenta. And I use a very soft filbert to apply the paint, as I don't want too much texture to build up in this stage of the painting. Once I have established the blue of the sky, I introduce the shadowed part of the clouds using a mixture of quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and a little bit of titanium white. And I'm still using that filbert to get those really soft edges. And once I have established all the darks within the sky area, I begin laying down the highlighted part of the clouds using a mixture of Naples yellow, titanium white, and quinacridone magenta. And when painting landscapes at sunrise or sunset, it's really important to have an area of great contrast, especially within the sky. I also add cadmium lemon into the mix just to punch the color up even more. Once the whole sky is complete, I take a soft, dry brush and just blend out the edges of the clouds. I use burnt umber, ultramarine blue, titanium white, and quinacridone magenta to establish the shadows in the mountains. And when applying that first layer of color, it's handy to have a really soft brush, in this case, the Evergreen Pointed Round from Rosemary & Co. Now, pretty much out of all the landscapes I've ever painted, the Grand Tetons are probably my favorite, mostly because of the sheer complexity within those cliffs. I start laying down the colors for the lit side of the peak using a very similar mixture to what I used for the clouds. Now this may look like pure titanium white, but I've actually toned it down a little bit using quinacridone magenta and burnt umber. I'm saving those pure titanium white accents for when I know the mountain is complete. And one of my favorite brushes for painting snow is this small ivory dagger. In these areas where there is not as much reflected light, I mix a little bit more ultramarine blue and cobalt teal into the mix. And in the areas where there is a considerable amount of reflected light from the sky, I mix more titanium white and quinacridone magenta into the mix just to make it a little bit more violet. I'm using a number 0 ivory pointed round to get some of these shadows in the distant trees here. And since this peak is being hit with the most sunlight, I'm using almost pure titanium white with the same brush I was using for painting the clouds. And I'm using that evergreen pointed round once again to knock in those blue shadows of the snow. It's really the little details that bring an entire painting like this together to give the illusion of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. And that's what I really love about traditional realism, is that when you get up close to it, it's a mess of brush strokes and thick paint, but when you back up, it all disappears. This smaller peak tucked behind the 2 larger peaks is receiving some pretty intense sunlight, so I'm using almost pure titanium white once again, mixed with a little bit of Naples yellow. Now it's always a good idea to have certain brushes reserved for certain colors. Like here, I'm using this pointed round only for the shadowed part of the snow, and I'm using that large filbert for the highlighted parts. And the reason for this is to make sure your colors don't get muddied up throughout your painting session. I start knocking in these distant trees using a 00 pointed round. It's really important while painting distant trees is to never use green straight out of the tube. Rather, it's best to mix your greens. And the green I'm using here is a mixture of burnt umber, cobalt teal, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna with a little bit of titanium white. And this helps to give the illusion that these trees are miles away. The only green I use straight out of the tube is phthalo green, and I'll be reserving that green for the immediate foreground. There's a small cloud in the valley right behind the barn, and I just knocked this in with one of my favorite brushes to use, the Tish Dagger, designed by my good friend Andrew Tischler from Rosemary & Co. And you can find a link to that brush in the description down below. The green I'm using for this tree is almost the same green I was using for those background mountains, only I introduced a little bit of phthalo green and cadmium lemon. So it comes much further forward than that background forest. Still using that Tish Dagger, I knock in this distant meadow right below that cloud. I start applying the colors for the shadowed side of the barn using a simple mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt umber with a little bit of titanium white. Now these shingles are no easy task to paint, so I'm going to have to build this up one layer at a time. I roughly block in the reflected highlights of the shingles using a little bit more titanium white and quinacridone magenta. A little rule I like to live by is that if I tone my canvases a lighter color, I knock in my darks first. If I tone my canvas black, I knock in my lights first. Now the color of the barn is significantly warmer than the surrounding elements, so I mix cadmium lemon, cadmium red, Naples yellow, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and titanium white. And using a small ivory pointed round, I just established the smallest details within the wood. Using the smallest Tish Dagger, I knock in these grass shadows, mixing ultramarine blue, phthalo green, and a little bit of quinacridone magenta. Since this foreground is incredibly complex, I have to do a firm block in before I even think about applying any details. And this evergreen filbert is the perfect brush for blocking in this sagebrush. Now that I've let this block in / modeling layer dry, I go in with my darkest darks, mixing ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and phthalo green. I'm using the smallest ivory dagger to apply these individual grass blades, mixing Naples yellow, titanium white, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. It's very important while painting grass to make each blade going in a little bit of a different direction. If we make them go all in the same direction, we won't be able to achieve a sense of realism. And with adding just a few more little details, I think this painting of the Grand Tetons is finished.
Well, that about wraps this video up, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you came away with it with some detailed techniques that you can incorporate into your own landscape painting. Now, as always, you can find me on my website at CodyOldham.com and on my Instagram page at CodyOldhamArtist. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.